I served his family for 30 years, washed their clothes, buried their dead, and mourned the man I thought was my husband. Then I died, and saw him walk in with his real wife and their grandchild. But heaven gave me one gift, a second chance. This time I won't cry. I'll burn it all down, and become the woman they never saw coming. In my last life I died alone in a house filled with ghosts. Not literal ones, though by the end I might as well have become one myself. For 30 years I scrubbed floors, tended to my paralyzed father-in-law, and offered up everything I had in the name of duty. I believed I owed the Reed family my life. Until I saw him again. Thomas Reed. Alive. He walked into the ancestral courtyard like he had never left, holding the hand of a woman in a red dress, Ava Lynn, and smiling like he'd never shattered mine. They brought a child with them, a boy around 10. The villagers whispered he was Thomas's grandson. And I stood there in my faded widow's clothes, hands trembling from arthritis, back hunched from decades of work, heart bursting from betrayal. He looked younger than me. I died with rage in my chest and salt in my throat. I died cursing them. And then I opened my eyes. It was the same bamboo cot. The same coarse blanket. My fingers brushed against my legs and I gasped. Smooth. No calluses. No tremors. My hands were young. The air smelled of smoke and rain. A rooster crowed in the distance. No, it couldn't be. I sat up too fast, dizzy. Outside the window, I heard the chatter of villagers and the creak of a bicycle chain. Elena. Come out. Something's happened. Mrs. Liu's voice. I stood up slowly this time, my feet unsure of whether they belonged to me. A knock rattled the front door. Elena Moore, someone bellowed. I pushed it open. There stood the village postman and Chief Lynn, Ava Lynn's father. Bad news, the postman said solemnly. It's about Thomas Reed. Just like that I knew. I had returned to the day of Thomas's death. The telegram was handed to me without ceremony. Thomas Reed, presumed drowned after Southern ferry capsized. Body unrecovered. As I read it, I heard Margaret Reed's theatrical scream before I saw her. My son. My only son, she wailed, crumpling to the ground with all the grace of a dying cow. You killed him, Elena. You sent him off and now he's dead. You cursed our family. It was exactly like before, right down to the accusation. But this time I didn't cry. Margaret grabbed my wrist with surprising force. You're not leaving this house, you ungrateful girl. Not now. Not ever. The postman looked awkwardly at the ground. Chief Lynn stepped forward, voice low and heavy with false sympathy. Elena, he said. I heard you got into the University of Medical Sciences. That's impressive. But now that Thomas is gone, don't you think it's a little selfish to abandon his mother and brother? They need you. Selfish. That was the word that haunted me in my past life. I had heard it whispered behind my back. Hurled at me during dinner. Echoed in the silence when I dared to write to my parents asking for help. And now here it was again, dressed in polite concern. I looked at Chief Lynn, his slicked hair, his fake frown, the glint in his eyes. I'm not going anywhere, I said gently. Margaret's face relaxed. Good girl. But, I added, if I'm not going to medical school, then neither is anyone. Their smiles vanished. Margaret's hand moved toward the envelope sitting on the low table. My university acceptance letter. I saw her fingers twitch as she reached for it, like she had done in my previous life, when she tore it open with glee and handed it to Chief Lynn. He had used it to enroll Ava in my place. But this time, I was ready. The stove in the courtyard still smoldered from this morning's breakfast fire. Without breaking eye contact, I strode over, grabbed the envelope and held it over the flame. Elena, no. Margaret shrieked. What are you doing? I dropped it. They all screamed. The paper curled and blackened instantly. Smoke rose in elegant spirals as the edges flaked into ash. My granddaughter. Chief Lynn choked. She could have. I turned to them with tears in my eyes, the perfect picture of grief. I'm sorry, I whispered. You're right. My husband is dead. I shouldn't go. I should stay here, forever. I turned and ran, through the courtyard, past the stunned postman, down the narrow village path. And when I was far enough that no one could see, I laughed. Because I hadn't burned the real letter. I had hidden my true acceptance notice under my blouse that morning, folded against my skin. The envelope I torched was an old electric bill. Let them cry. Let them scream. Let them believe they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The woman they thought they could trap again, the obedient widow, the chained servant, was already gone. This time I wasn't mourning Thomas Reed. I was burying him. The township government office hadn't changed. The same cracked floor tiles. The same warped filing cabinets shoved into corners. The same worn-out man behind the counter with a perpetual look of boredom and judgment. I stood before him trying to still my racing heart. I looked like any other widow in mourning, messy hair, puffy eyes, trembling fingers clutching a death certificate. But I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to confirm the first crack in the lie they built around me. I need to dissolve my marriage, I said quietly. The clerk didn't even blink. Name of the deceased? Thomas Reed, I replied. From Maple Village. He opened a thick binder and began flipping through pages. I held my breath. This was the moment. In my past life I had come here months after Thomas's death, weighed down by guilt and still trapped in the Reed's web. That time I never checked the record for myself. I just handed over whatever documents they told me to, eyes clouded by grief. But now, I was looking with both eyes wide open. The clerk frowned. What's your name again? Elena Moore. He stopped flipping. Brows furrowed, he looked at me. Are you sure? My stomach tightened. Yes. I'm Elena Moore. I married Thomas Reed last year in Maple Village. He squinted at the register again. That's odd. According to this, Thomas Reed is already legally married, but not to you. I didn't flinch. Who then? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Ava Lynn, he said, glancing up warily. Married September 5, 1979. I stared at the date. That was one day before our wedding ceremony. One day. So they had already tied the knot. And the very next day they staged a fake village wedding to make me believe I was his wife. A legally married man had walked me down a fake aisle just to trap me into staying and caring for his paralyzed father. I almost laughed. Almost. But the burning behind my ribs was too hot to let anything out but silence. The clerk cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. Miss Moore, I'm sorry. There's no marriage record for you and Mr. Reed. Nothing we can dissolve. I straightened my spine. Understood, I said, voice steady. He watched me carefully. Maybe he expected me to faint or cry or scream. But I only nodded once, turned around and walked out the door like I had just bought a bag of rice. Not uncovered 30 years of deception. The midday sun hit me like a slap. But I welcomed it. I was awake now. Truly awake. The bus ride back to the city was long and bumpy. I sat by the window, cradling the real acceptance letter still tucked safely beneath my blouse. The cheap plastic seat creaked under my shifting weight, but I barely noticed. All I could see were flashes of memory. Margaret Reed slamming a rice bowl onto the table, scolding me for not waking up early enough to boil herbal tonic. Thomas's empty bed and cold smile. Ava Lynn arriving in the courtyard that final day, her lipstick perfect, her grandchild smiling like I had never existed. All of it was a performance. And I had been cast as the fool. Not anymore. This time I wasn't going to break under their lies. This time I had the truth on my side and youth in my hands. My parents' home stood tall and dignified in the city, a relic of our family's old status before the chaos of the re-education years. The once pristine walls were now faded, and the garden slightly overgrown, but the warmth was still there. When I stepped off the bus and walked up the familiar path, my mother flung open the front door before I could knock. Elena, she gasped. I nodded once. She rushed forward, arms wrapping around me. Her embrace was tight, trembling. Are you really back? I'm home, I whispered, pressing my face into her shoulder. Behind her, my father appeared, eyes red-rimmed and jaw clenched. He said nothing, just walked up, rested a hand on my head like he used to when I was a little girl, and whispered, "You're safe now." And just like that, the weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying cracked apart. Over steaming bowls of congee and soft tofu, I told them everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the part about remembering my past life. Even I wouldn't believe that story if it weren't happening to me. But I told them about the marriage lie. The acceptance letter I had faked burning. The way Margaret had tried to force me to stay. My mother dropped her spoon. That witch, she muttered. My father's eyes darkened. And they forged a marriage to Ava Lynn before your ceremony? They never even registered ours. Not once. My mother reached across the table and gripped my hand. You're not going back there, Elena. I don't care what they say or do. I'm not, I said. I've already cut ties. My father nodded firm. Good. The Reeds are dead to us. If Thomas shows up alive, I'll bury him myself. I cracked a small smile. He won't. Not for a long time. The next morning, I slipped the real acceptance letter into a new envelope and walked to the university's local office to request a referral letter. The staff there barely looked at me, just stamped what needed to be stamped and handed me the document. I was officially on the roster again. Elena Moore, was going to the University of Medical Sciences. In my past life, that dream had burned to ash before it ever started. I had thrown it away with trembling hands and guilt-ridden eyes. But this time I had thrown them into the fire. Back in the countryside, I imagined the chaos that must have erupted after I disappeared. Margaret tearing through the house. Chief Lynn demanding answers. Ava throwing a fit when she found out no referral letter had arrived. But I didn't care. Let them burn in the fire they lit. I was never their daughter-in-law. I was never even their family. The Reed family had buried my name in dirt for decades. But now I was dusting it off, holding it high and building a future with it. And nothing, not Thomas, not Margaret, not Ava, was going to take it from me again. The days that followed were calm. Too calm. I ate my mother's home-cooked meals, read medical textbooks under warm lamplight, and reviewed biology notes like any student preparing for university. But peace is a strange thing when it follows a storm. It doesn't soothe, it exposes. And in that stillness, with nothing to distract me, the truth started to whisper. Then scream. The first whisper came in the form of a memory. Thomas, sitting quietly under the apricot tree in the courtyard, clutching a cloth over his chest, claiming he had a chronic illness that made it impossible to marry or touch a woman. His eyes had been soft, pitiful. I remembered how my heart had ached for him. At the time I thought he was just afraid. Traumatized by war, maybe. I had told him I didn't mind. That I would marry him anyway. In truth, I married a shadow. Because his illness never existed. One morning I sat by my window holding a mug of bitter tea. My fingers traced the rim as a series of questions ran through my mind like film reels. Why had Thomas, a soldier who could have married any number of village girls, chosen me? Why had Chief Lynn, Ava's father, been so eager to push the union? And most importantly, why had they arranged our wedding just days after the university results were released? I thought back to that moment when Margaret snatched my acceptance letter. The way Chief Lynn had smiled and said Ava would make good use of it. That wasn't coincidence. It was a coup. Flashbacks came in slow motion, sharper than the first time I lived them. The way Margaret suddenly became kind when I was studying for the national exam. How she encouraged me to stay in the dorms near the village school, so I could focus. How Chief Lynn made frequent visits, pretending to check on our youth's progress. They were never checking in. They were watching. I was the only one among the re-educated youth with any real chance of passing. I had a medical background. My mother had been a nurse. My father a military doctor. Even after we were relocated during the political campaigns, they kept books in the attic and trained me in silence. Among the dozens of girls sent to the village, I was the brightest. The most qualified. The most useful. And the most isolated. Perfect prey. The next piece fell into place when I remembered something odd about Ava Lynn. Ava had always been sweet and polished. Smarter than most. We shared a bed for nearly a year in the girls' dormitory. But just after the exam results came out, she had disappeared for 2 weeks. No one could reach her. She returned with new clothes, a new hairstyle, and an announcement. She was moving to the city to study medicine. Everyone clapped. Even I had clapped. Because I hadn't known she was using my name to get in. I pulled open my old leather notebook. The one where I had written down every university result from the village notice board that year. Sure enough, the original listing had shown. Elena Moore, admitted to University of Medical Sciences, Washington. But later, when the village posted the final roster, the name was gone. I hadn't noticed at the time. Too distracted. Too devastated over Thomas's sudden death. Instead, I had handed over my future and walked into their trap like a lamb to slaughter. It wasn't just Ava. The entire village had been in on it. Chief Lin had used his influence to swap the university files. Margaret had staged the wedding. Thomas had told me he was sick so I wouldn't expect intimacy or affection. And his paralyzed father? That had been the final piece. A house full of invalids. No money for a nurse. No intention of hiring one. They just needed someone too guilty, too loyal, and too educated to run. And they chose me. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that evening, toothbrush idle in my hand. My reflection looked back at me with fury in her eyes. In my past life, I had thought I was a noble daughter-in-law. A widow with dignity. A woman paying for her husband's memory. But I wasn't a widow. I was a prop. A walking hospital bed with a smile. And the moment Ava got her degree, the Reeds tossed me aside like kitchen waste. I shuddered, gripping the sink. They had tricked me into 30 years of unpaid servitude, and celebrated while I burned. Not again. That night I sat down at my desk and lit a fresh candle. Its flickering light reminded me of the flames that devoured the Reed household in my past life. I wrote one name on a blank page. Margaret Reed. Under it, Mr. Lin. Then, Thomas Reed. And finally, Ava Lin. I stared at them one by one. In my past life I bowed to each of them. Served them. Saved them. Loved them. In this life I would destroy them. The first strike would be silence. Let them think I was heartbroken and ashamed. Let them believe their plan had worked. The Reed house would soon realize I'd never returned. The ashes of the fake envelope would be all they had to cling to. No confirmation from the university. No response from me. No one to cook their meals or wipe their soiled bedsheets. Let them rot. I would not strike with fists, I would strike with truth. And when the time came I would drag every last one of them into the sunlight and make them choke on their own schemes. A few days later my mother returned from the market with a faint smile. "Guess who I ran into?" she said. I glanced up from my notes. "Who?" "Mrs. Liu. From Maple Village. She says Margaret's in a frenzy. You vanished and the entire house is falling apart." I raised my teacup calmly. "Is that so?" "They say you went mad from grief and ran into the mountains," she added with a snort. "Apparently Ava's returned home to mourn too. Such a good daughter-in-law." I nearly spit out my tea. Good. Let them mourn a ghost. Because the real Elena Moore wasn't dead. She was studying medicine. And she was coming for them. I didn't lift a finger when I heard he died. No flowers. No mourning. Not even a second thought. In my past life, I had knelt at his bedside every morning and night, wiping sweat from his fevered brow, rubbing his withered limbs with warm oils, feeding him spoon by spoon. I gave him 30 years of loyalty. He gave me contempt in return. So when word reached me that Leonard Reed, the once feared patriarch of the Reed family, had died covered in bed sores and rot, I simply sipped my tea. No pity. No regret. Only satisfaction. It started about a month after I left Maple Village. According to Mrs. Liu's gossip, graciously delivered through my mother, Margaret had made a spectacle of herself, crying in the courtyard, accusing me of abandonment, shouting that I had gone mad and disappeared into the mountains, that I was too grief-stricken to live. It was almost impressive how quickly she rewrote the story. But grief never made me disappear. Truth did. They had spent so long twisting my life into a lie, they never imagined I'd escape it. And now, without their loyal servant to wash sheets, cook congee and massage stiff limbs, the Reed house collapsed like a rotted beam. Margaret never touched him, Mrs. Liu had whispered, scandal practically dripping from her tongue. She left him in that room day and night. He cried out for food, for help. But she just left. By the end of that second month, the neighbors couldn't take the smell anymore. The door was kicked open and Leonard was found slumped in his bed, eyes wide open, skin paper-thin and ulcerated. Insects had already begun their feast. His body was burned immediately. The stench had seeped into the wood. They said he died alone, calling out for me. Let him. Let the last name he ever spoke be mine. News travels fast in the countryside. But even faster in a university dorm. It was Isla Chin, my old roommate during our re-education days, who spotted me first. I was standing in line at the campus canteen, holding a tray of rice and steamed greens when she squealed my name. Elena Moore? I blinked up and turned slowly. There she was. Hair cut shorter, round glasses, the same determined fire in her eyes. We stared for a beat before she rushed forward, nearly knocking the tray from my hands as she hugged me. Elena. You're alive. I couldn't help but laugh. What, did they start carving my gravestone already? Close, she huffed. Rumor was, you went insane after your husband died and ran into the woods. Some said you drowned yourself. Comforting. She pulled me into a seat, her eyes darting as if afraid someone would overhear. But you're here. And you look good. Really good. So what happened? I smiled faintly. Let's just say, I finally woke up. Isla and I resumed our friendship as if no time had passed. She was studying surgery, brilliant and blunt as ever. Her family, unlike mine, had supported her through everything. She had married a man from the capital who doted on her and was raising a toddler with his same stubborn chin. But most importantly, Isla wasn't the type to pry too hard. When I told her, I left the reeds behind, she didn't press. She only asked, do you need help staying hidden? I nodded. She covered for me without hesitation. When Margaret sent letters to the university registrar claiming I was mentally unstable and needed to be retrieved, Isla intercepted them. When Ava tried to get her father to block my academic funding, Isla tipped off one of the senior deans with quiet efficiency. No one suspected. Elena Moore was officially declared missing in Maple Village. But in Washington I was alive and thriving. They say grief carves you hollow, but in my case it made space for something else. Cold logic. Margaret had buried her husband under the guise of grief, of course. Word was that Thomas and Ava finally returned for the funeral. They'd been gone for years, chasing business dreams in the South. But it hadn't panned out. They came back with one suitcase between them, Isla said, sipping from her canteen. Some say they lost everything. Good, I murmured. The villagers weren't kind, she added. No one attended the funeral except the coffin carriers and 2 priests. Not even Chief Lynn. That made me pause. Chief Lynn had been Thomas's greatest supporter. Ava's father. The architect of this entire scheme. If even he had turned his back on them, things must have been worse than I imagined. It was time to start unraveling him too. From my dorm room I began making quiet moves. I wrote anonymous letters to the county education board, asking them to review the sudden transfer of my university seat back in 1979. I used a different name and mailed them from various post boxes around the city. Isla helped track down Ava's thesis submission from her final year in medical school. I flagged passages that matched a medical journal published 3 years prior. Plagiarism. She'd lose her certification if caught. Slowly, quietly, I plucked at the edges of their credibility, pulling threads until the whole web sagged. I didn't need fire. I needed silence. Shadows. Surgical precision. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Ava had returned to Maple Village to care for Margaret. Publicly anyway. Privately, everyone knew they were struggling. Thomas was rumored to be looking for work in the city. Margaret was spending money they didn't have trying to rebuild the Reed name. No one knew I was watching. Waiting. Smiling. Sometimes I'd walk to the edge of campus where the woods opened up into old trails and think of that final day, my last day before rebirth. Thomas had stood there, hand in Ava's, their grandson giggling as Margaret ordered me to serve them tea. They had taken everything from me. My career. My name. My family. And still they had smiled. No. They had nothing. And I was just getting started. It was a chilly morning in late autumn when they returned. The university campus was wrapped in golden leaves and whispers of the upcoming midterms. Students shuffled between buildings, scarves wrapped tight, their minds buried in textbooks and deadlines. I was sitting beneath the ginkgo tree just outside the main library, highlighting passages in a surgical case review. My thermos sat by my side, still warm with the barley tea my mother had brewed before sunrise. That's when I heard it. Elena. Elena Moore. A voice, hoarse, raw, desperate. I looked up, and there he was. Thomas Reed. Alive. He looked nothing like the man I once married. The proud, square-jawed soldier from my youth had become a husk. His shoulders were slouched, his eyes sunken and ringed with sleeplessness. His once immaculate coat was now too big on him, faded at the seams. Behind him, a wheelchair screeched across the stone path. Margaret. She looked worse. Her face was skeletal, lips chapped, and her once judgmental eyes were now swollen with illness and fury. She wore a thick scarf and layers of clothes, yet still shivered in the morning breeze. Elena, please. Thomas stepped forward, arms open as if I would run into them. I stood slowly and took a step back. Don't, I said quietly. Don't come any closer. Margaret whimpered behind him, voice cracking. We searched for you for so long, we thought you died. We grieved. You lied, I cut in. You used my grief, twisted it into a noose and watched me hang myself with it. Thomas blinked, clearly taken aback. Elena, we didn't know you'd take it so hard. You faked a marriage, I snapped, loud enough that passing students slowed to glance. You let me care for your father for 30 years without telling me I was never legally your wife. Evelyn was. His lips parted. No words came. And now you're here, I added coldly, thinking I'll play the maid again? His voice cracked. We've lost everything, Elena. The house. The clinic. The land. Ava, she left. I arched an eyebrow. She left. Before he could answer, a sharp voice rang through the courtyard like a whip. She didn't leave. She was thrown away. Evelyn appeared from behind a nearby tree like a curse summoned from hell. Her once elegant coat was torn at the sleeve. Her hair hung wild over her shoulders. In her hand, a flash of silver. My eyes widened slightly. A knife. A carving knife, the kind used in kitchens, still stained at the hilt. She stormed toward us, ignoring the few students now beginning to step away from the scene. You miserable, gutless coward, she hissed at Thomas. I sacrificed everything for you. My future. My name. My body. And for what? Thomas paled. Ava, not here. You lied to me, she shrieked. You told me Elena was dead. You said she'd lost her mind and wandered into the river. You made me your wife in the shadows while she was still alive. I lost my medical license because of you. I lost our child because of her. Margaret's head snapped up. What are you talking about, Ava? Ava turned, eyes burning. You, she growled. You're worse than him. You treated me like garbage. You made me cook, clean, lie to the neighbors, like I wasn't good enough to be part of your precious family. Margaret's voice trembled. Ava. I took you in. You let me miscarry. Ava screamed. You locked me in the house when I was bleeding and refused to call the doctor. You let our baby die. He turned to Thomas. And you still listened to her. You always listened to her. Until you came back here chasing her. Her eyes met mine. I knew you were alive, she spat. I followed them. I saw you. I stayed perfectly still. Good, I said calmly. I hoped you would. Ava let out a strangled cry and lunged. The knife plunged into Thomas's chest with a wet, sickening sound. His eyes widened in shock, mouth open but silent. He staggered backward, one hand gripping the hilt that now jutted from his ribs. He crumpled to the ground. Margaret shrieked. Thomas. Ava didn't hesitate. She turned on the old woman with the fury of 10 lifetimes and drove the knife straight into her chest. Then again. And again. Margaret flailed, kicking the footrests of her wheelchair, blood pooling through her coat. By the time campus security came rushing through the courtyard gates, it was already over. Thomas lay sprawled on the stone path, blood soaking into the cracks between the tiles. Margaret slumped lifelessly in her chair, her scarf drenched crimson. Ava stood frozen, knife trembling in her grip, eyes hollow. Me. I didn't flinch. Not once. The guards shouted commands. Ava didn't run. She just looked at me, blood splattered across her cheeks, shaking. They ruined me, she whispered. And so did you. I tilted my head. No, Ava. I just stopped letting you ruin me. They tackled her then, 2 men wrestling the knife from her grip, dragging her to the ground as she kicked and wailed. I watched in silence as she was cuffed, screaming into the earth. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the bodies had been removed, I sat back down beneath the ginkgo tree. My book still lay open, pages fluttering in the wind. I picked it up, brushing off a speck of blood that had landed near the spine. Isla found me there a few minutes later. She didn't speak right away. She just sat down beside me. Was that your husband? No, I said. Just a man I used to know. She didn't press. Instead, she handed me a bottle of warm chrysanthemum tea. We sipped in silence. And for the first time in both my lives, I truly felt free. They took Ava away in shackles. Her screams echoed down the university courtyard like an opera of vengeance and madness. Some students wept. Others just watched stunned. Me. I didn't blink. I stood by the old ginkgo tree, my tea cooling in my hand, and watched as the woman who once stole my life was finally forced to carry her own truth. They shoved her into the back of a patrol van, her blood-streaked face pressed to the glass, eyes locked on mine. I didn't smile. That would have given her too much importance. Instead, I turned my back on her, just like they had once turned their backs on me. The police came to question me the next morning. I was in my dorm room folding laundry with slow, deliberate movements. When they knocked, I didn't even flinch. "Miss Elena Moore?" "Yes," I said, opening the door. "Two plainclothes officers. Calm, firm, polite. They asked if I knew the victims. If I had any prior contact with Ava Lynn. If I'd known she was in possession of a weapon. I answered everything with clear, measured words. I gave them the facts, not feelings. "She was never supposed to come back," I said. "Yet she did," one officer replied. "I guess guilt always finds its way home," I murmured. They asked one final question before they left. "Do you feel sorry for her?" I looked them dead in the eye. No. 2 weeks later, the confession was released. Ava Lynn had poured out everything. From the fake marriage to the forged registry. From the scheme to trap me in Maple Village to the stolen university admission. From Chief Lynn's corruption to Margaret's manipulation. All of it written, signed, sealed. She named names. Times. Dates. Documents. Letters. Even detailed how Margaret had faked the envelope fire by using an old government form. How Ava had been the one to orchestrate the envelope switch in my absence. She didn't protect anyone. He burned the whole structure down. Thomas. He admitted he was always weak. More pawn than player. But Margaret and Mr. Lynn? They were the architects, she wrote in her statement. I just followed orders. Until I had nothing left. The public was stunned. The Reeds, once respected by their village and feared by their peers, were now infamous. The final nail came when Ava admitted to helping Mr. Lynn forge educational documents to submit in her name using my credentials. She gave them the names of government workers who had been bribed. I took that confession and made copies. Dozens. And I sent every one of them to the township office with an accompanying letter written in my own hand. "If you will not investigate these crimes against your own people, then I will take this to the county. And the province. And the capital." Elena Moore, the woman they tried to erase. Within 3 days, Mr. Lynn was removed from his post as village chief. Publicly, it was for mishandling educational records. Privately, it was disgrace. The same man who strutted through the village like a rooster, declaring himself the people's voice, now sat outside the county building, gray-haired, vacant, jobless. Rumors swirled. Bribery, forged papers, blackmail, misused aid funds. They say his wife fainted in the middle of the village when she heard the news. That his daughter, Ava's younger sister, was forced to drop out of school due to the scandal. It wasn't enough to ruin him. I wanted him forgotten. And slowly that's what happened. The same villagers who once whispered about poor Elena, now whispered about that Lynn man, and how karma had finally caught up with him. Ava's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Her confession had been handwritten in a state of rage but signed in absolute clarity. 2 murders. One in broad daylight. One in public, witnessed by over 20 people. Her sentence was announced in the local newspaper 2 months after the incident. Death. By lethal injection. Execution scheduled for the winter solstice. The same date Margaret Reed had once lit incense for her ancestors and forced me to kneel beside her for hours, praying that I would give her grandchildren, never knowing I was never her son's legal wife. Now on that same day Ava Lynn would meet her own gods. When Isla told me the news, we were standing outside the hospital cafe, drinking black coffee and watching the snow fall gently onto the pavement. "They really did it," she said softly. "She's gone." I sipped from my cup. "Good. You really feel nothing?" I stared out across the snow-covered sidewalk where footprints melted into puddles. "I feel clean," I said at last. That night, I returned to my dorm room and opened the wooden box I kept tucked beneath my bed. Inside was a small bundle of letters, faded, yellowing. All addressed to me. All unopened. All sent from my parents during those early years when I had foolishly refused to come home. When I thought my sacrifice had meaning. When I believed love was supposed to hurt. I pulled one out, my fingers trembling. I finally opened it. "My dearest Elena, we miss you. We know you're carrying a burden you won't speak about. But please remember, you are our daughter before you are anyone's wife. Come home whenever you're ready. There is nothing to forgive. I folded the letter again and held it to my chest. They had never blamed me. Only I had. And now I didn't have to carry it anymore. The past had finally released its grip on me. Ava was gone. Margaret and Thomas were buried together. Ironic really, given how violently they died. Mr. Lin had been stripped of everything he'd used to hurt me. And I had risen from the ashes. Every day I now walked the campus of the University of Medical Sciences not as a widow. Not as a servant. Not as a pawn in someone else's plan. I walked as Elena Moore. Student. Survivor. Future doctor. That night, top of my class. Every lecture, every exam, every dissection lab, I gave more than my peers could fathom. They studied for scores. I studied for salvation. I wasn't just chasing knowledge. I was rebuilding a future that had once been stolen from me. At 26, I was selected for an international exchange program. Washington to Boston. Boston to Zurich. Zurich to Kyoto. I chased the globe like it had once chased me. I lived in dormitories and studio apartments, eating rice balls one week and rye bread the next. I worked in trauma wards and orthopedic wings, assisting in procedures most residents weren't even allowed to watch. But I never lost myself. Because I never forgot who I used to be. Elena Moore, the widow who never was. 5 years passed. I returned home with a diploma lined in gold, a resume full of accolades, and a letter of recommendation from one of Japan's most respected surgeons. The Ministry of Health called me a priority national asset. They assigned me to Capital General Hospital as its youngest ever department head at 31. Not assistant. Not junior. Head. My first day at the hospital I wore white, crisp and uncreased. My name tag gleamed beneath the coat pocket. Dr. Elena Moore, Orthopedic Surgery. As I stepped through the automatic doors, a nurse turned to me and smiled. Are you new here for your internship? I smiled back. No. I'm your new boss. Isachin was waiting inside. 5 years had aged her well. Shorter hair, sharper eyes. She now wore the navy blue coat reserved for surgical consultants. She had made her way up the hard way without connections or legacy, just like me. She grinned the moment she saw me and wrapped me in a hug, clipboard and all. You came back, she said into my shoulder. I told you I would. You've made history, she added. Youngest head in Capital General's records. Even the board is buzzing. They'll stop buzzing once I start making changes, I murmured. Terrifying already, she teased. We fell into our rhythm immediately. I mentored junior doctors, led morning rounds, rewrote outdated surgical protocols, and introduced minimally invasive techniques I'd learned overseas. I started programs for women in medicine, inviting speakers, opening scholarships, hosting international lectures. Nisla, he became my right hand. I assigned her complex cases, entrusted her with department-wide reviews, and asked her opinion in board meetings. She had the same fire I remembered from our youth. Only now it was tempered with wisdom and edge. Watching her operate reminded me of a version of myself I had buried. Not the broken girl from Maple Village, but the one who dreamed under moonlight in the re-education dormitories. The one who read anatomy books by candlelight when others slept. The one who wrote her name in the frost of old windows and dared to hope. One afternoon, Isla barged into my office, coat half on, hair tied in a lopsided knot. We have a new transfer intern, she said, tossing a folder on my desk. Bright. Nervous. Keeps saying she wants to shadow you. I flipped open the file. Top grades. Rural upbringing. Quiet demeanor. Handwriting like mine at 19. I paused. She's from Maple Village, Isla added softly. I looked up slowly. Did she request me? No, Isla said. I assigned her. I smiled. Good. That evening I walked the hospital grounds alone. The courtyard trees had begun to bloom, the first signs of spring breaking through the city's frost. It had been years since I thought of the Reed family. Of Ava. Of Margaret. Of Thomas. Of the fire. Of the blood. Of the girl who walked barefoot down a dirt path with a fake telegram in her hand and real sorrow in her chest. But I didn't cry anymore. Those memories no longer clawed at me. They existed behind glass now, visible but contained. Painful but powerless. They had shaped me. But they didn't own me. In the staff lounge, someone had pinned up an article. Capital General's youngest department head returns from abroad. Dr. Elena Moore is a symbol of resilience and excellence, says Director Fong. Her journey inspires a new generation. I stood in front of it for a moment, rereading my name over and over. Dr. Elena Moore. Not widow. Not servant. Not victim. Just me. Finally, just me. A few days later, Isla and I stood in the surgical observation room, watching the new intern nervously scrub in for her first assist. Did you ever think we'd make it here? Isla asked. I watched the girl below, shaking hands, stiff spine, determined eyes. No, I whispered. But I never stopped wanting it. Not even when it hurt? Especially when it hurt. She smiled. You really aren't haunted anymore, are you? No, I said, turning to her with steady eyes. But I remember everything. The operating room was quiet except for the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of breath beneath the ventilator. Bright surgical lights illuminated the narrow field where Isla and I worked side by side, hands moving in perfect sync. It was a complicated procedure. Reconstructive spinal stabilization on a 10-year-old boy injured in a motorcycle accident. A single mistake could mean paralysis. But we didn't falter. Isla passed the scalpel without a word. I applied pressure, secured a clamp, and steadied the bleeder. It was like dancing with memory, each step choreographed by years of training, precision born from pain and perseverance. After 6 hours, the final suture was placed. We stepped back as the monitors confirmed what we already knew. Success. In the scrub room, we peeled off our gloves in silence. I looked over at Isla. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her eyes were alive. You're getting faster, I said. He grinned. You're getting softer. Impossible. We laughed, the kind that echoed against tile walls and sterile steel. The kind of laughter that said, we made it. As we walked back toward the lounge, she nudged my shoulder. I have something to tell you. Another intern pregnant? No. She stopped just outside the break room and leaned against the wall, folding her arms. It's about Mr. Lin. My smile faded. She didn't need to say which one. There was only one man who still lingered in my shadow. A contact from Maple Village called me yesterday, she said, voice lower now. It's confirmed. He drowned himself. I blinked. He slipped away the same day Ava's execution was made public. They say he went to the river at dawn, weighted his coat with stones and, she paused, no one found him for 3 days. Silence stretched between us. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel joy. Not anger either. Just finality. He had built the web. Ava had lit the match. Margaret held the chains. And Thomas had stood by, letting it all happen. Now they were all gone. The last door closed. That night, I lit a candle on my windowsill, not for mourning but for cleansing. Then I texted Isla. Come for dinner. Bring the kid. My apartment wasn't lavish, but it was home. Clean lines. Soft rugs. A small kitchen that always smelled faintly of ginger and cardamom. I stood at the stove stirring lotus root soup when Isla arrived with her son Leo. He was 6, chubby-cheeked, polite, and obsessed with space. The moment he spotted the star chart on my bookshelf, he gasped like he'd found treasure. Did you really live in Japan? He asked, eyes wide. I smiled. Yes. And in Switzerland, too. Did you meet astronauts? Only the kind that operate on hearts. He blinked, confused but intrigued. Dinner was loud in the best way. Isla shared hospital gossip while Leo told me about the girl in his class who pulled his hair. I let them tease me about my spotless kitchen, my over-seasoned radish pickles, and my stubborn refusal to buy a TV. Maybe you're too used to silence, Isla said, sipping tea after the dishes were cleared. Maybe I earned it, I replied softly. She nodded, her smile fading just a little. He's really gone, huh? I didn't need to ask who. Yes. She glanced around my apartment. The framed degree, the pressed flowers in the window, the photos of my parents, the books stacked on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. Do you ever feel lonely? I reached for my tea and held it for a moment, watching the steam spiral upward like a memory. Not anymore, I said. Once I built my life around people who didn't see me. Now I build it around what I see clearly. You really never looked back? I did, I admitted. But not to mourn. To measure how far I've come. After they left, I walked to my balcony and looked out over the city skyline. Neon lights blinked in the distance. The air was crisp, and somewhere nearby, someone was playing an old folk song on a flute. I leaned on the railing and let the wind run through my hair. In another life, I would have still been in Maple Village, kneeling by Margaret's bed, spoon-feeding her porridge while she cursed me. I would have died in silence. But this life? This one was mine. Completely, unapologetically mine. I took one last sip of tea, then whispered into the night as if the past still needed to hear it. They faked a marriage to trap me. I chose my future, and became the woman they never saw coming. The end.